Hi, Diane. Good evening. Hope you had a great weekend. I was thinking about some of our developments over the last couple of weeks, and I wanted to make sure that I was doing a more complete job in getting you all the information that we've covered so far. So, broadly speaking, we had a deck that we talked to you about generally how to use this particular AI platform for executive insights to drive employee productivity, cost optimization. And then we also created a kind of a one pager, which created a really high level and simple to look at document that identified what are the key benefits for Frazier to deploy a tool like this. And then I realized, although we did have a demo discussion at length on our second or third call, I can't remember exactly, it was lacking a little bit more of the actual functionality around the ONA feature, which was the key feature that I think that there was a lot of perceived value in terms of seeing the entire organization. So again, on the screen here, you'll see the deck that we talked about, identifying, essentially it's all about engagement. And so much of what our tool does is essentially by analyzing essentially companies' communications, you're able to increase the engagement score, or at least participation score significantly, because you're only opting out of the folks that are excluded from the data set. And we covered a brief overview of our dashboard and what we've done with Enron, and ingested those 500,000 or so communications and let the AI figure out what's happening in terms of overall trends and toxicity. But one of the things I'm going to try to get done today is to try to dive into specifically some of the functionality around groups, and then specifically down to the functionality of departments and specific individuals within those departments. So let me get into that. What I want to do is to toggle over to my other document here. This is the one pager that we put together for you guys, kind of just identifying at a high level what it is that we aim to do, which is provide executive management with visibility into changes in employee sentiment, to better manage people, culture, and ultimately the financials. So, what does that mean, and what is that? What are the questions that it answers? So we talked about being able to answer how is the overall organization's health, which managers have the most satisfied sub-employees underneath them, what are the best performing sales teams, what are the worst performing sales teams, why. Really, with some of the ONA features that I'm going to be displaying, you kind of get deep into that, some of that idiosyncrasies of what makes cultures come together and what's working and what's not. A few of the other ones are identifying something called centrality, which is identifying top salespeople or key people keeping departments together. So we can individually address each of these 7 points, but I think it's going to be a little bit better time well spent in terms of identifying a couple of the key points that you guys want to answer around sales enablement and optimizing managing of those sales folks. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to toggle over to an actual live demo. This is actually connected to the system. So as I move through the system, it's connected to, again, sample data, but data where you can see and imagine where it would be your data and some of the power and flexibility that you can see. So at the onset, you'll see the dashboard, and you'll see essentially a sentiment score. And the sentiment score oscillates over time. So you can see an improvement or a decrease in sentiment. Again, sentiment being positive, good sentiment, things that are improving culture, better communication, better positivity, better coaching, better leadership. All those things get picked up by the AI engine and essentially contribute to the positive sentiment score. Conversely, negative sentiment score takes in those other factors where people's email tones might be curt, or they might be short, or all those kinds of things in terms of including people across various departments, length of overall communication styles. If there's a precipitous drop in length, it shows a disengaged communication between those two particular folks, which contributes to overall negative sentiment. So we have this overall sentiment score, which is powerful in and of itself, and then we have a lot of these messages around toxic messages and off-topic messages. And the real key here is that there's a whole thing of around false positives, right? So you basically don't want too many alerts telling you that something is going on when something is not going on. And so in the old world of keyword searches and all of those kinds of stuff, basic technologies, you would get alerted on every single kind of, let's say negative or toxic kind of messages by simply doing a keyword search. Well, the power of AI is that it ups the sophistication of figuring out that discussing, an off-topic discussion around Sunday's football game and the results of that in a vulgar manner is very, very different than talking about a work-related matter with a person that is within department and putting them down, right? And putting them down to the point where there's a physical threat, identity threat. It could be misogynistic speech. It could be any of those points that is actually a toxic work environment discussion. Again, and the power of the system, and we feel like what we're really good at is being able to separate the intelligence of the system that alerts you to only the most important kinds of discussions that are happening. So this is broadly what's happening here, and then we identify some of the retention risk around employees. It kind of identifies the top retention risk. We've actually further refined the model to focus in on high performance retention risks or high value retention risks, where let's say your highest paid sales folks, if that's the list that you want, if we perceive a retention issue around there, immediately the top 3 salespeople get listed here for executive leadership or HR, if that's the case, to get involved and make sure that they're specifically in a good place. And then you also identify top toxic communicators. And again, all of these widgets are completely customizable. We can go down to the individual level. We can stay at the group level. It really is about the power and visibility that you want in the system. And so we did this and we showed this to you broadly. But what we didn't do is we didn't kind of dive into groups and individuals on a graph level. So what I want to do is I want to dive into the next level around groups. And you can kind of see here, it's separating out the total company score by individual groups. So what I've done here is taken that score, broken it down by, and this happens to be for a hospitality company, which has about 150 properties here in the U.S., and they have airport properties, urban city properties, resort and beach properties, and independent properties. And there's a legend here that goes from negative all the way to positive. And so what you see here is a trend of immediately where a CEO or leadership can focus in on what needs to be focused in on. So I want to focus in on just on negative trend places, and clearly urban city is the place that I have a big problem at. That's going to require some attention. Whereas less negative, you can see where things are improve or degrade over time, and then you can see positive where things increase over time. So resort and beach is getting positive, continues to get more and more positive, and we're in a good place here. Whereas conversely, you have this heavier negative kind of thing, and you can drill down once you actually select into an urban city category. Then you can, in this particular case, they might have 20 urban properties, and once they click on urban properties, they can dive into individual properties and measure sentiment by that. Now, the next one is a little bit more interesting to your specific case. What we have here is an ONA graph that is powered by both by edges, which is communication, and by AI. And so what's happening here is it's showing you these are 500 dots, and each of these dots represents a person. That particular dot here represents Jane Wall, and the dot over here represents Lindsay McMillan. And so by various colorings, I can see who's communicating with who across the entire company. Now there's about 500 dots on the screen, and I can see that engineering is here, right in the middle, in the red, and I can see that marketing is here in the darker blue, and I can see that sales is really tightly organized in this group right here, and then scattered about over the course of this various group. Now this could be an inside sales group, and this could be external field sales people, but this is the general mode of conversation, what's going on. And so again, from a data science perspective, you see these two specific groups, engineering and sales, who are highly centralized in what they do. And so that obviously means that there's centrality of managers that are working with those departments. So if I key into who that central person is, I can kind of, I can zoom in and kind of see that one particular person, David Borneas, is actually in the center of this particular sales or pre-sales or engineering sales team group. And we're going to be able to dive into David's profile in a little bit, but what I wanted to do is to show you how many different ways you can get this insight across the company. And so what we're doing here is we're basically seeing the entire company's communication. Now, if I really just want to focus on engineering and sales, and so what I'm trying to look at is it's something like innovation, where I'm trying to see sales is out there talking to customers, getting feedback, getting yeses or nos on proposals, and is the feedback that they're getting translating through marketing to engineering. And so what I can do is I can turn off all the other functions of the company, and I can go directly between engineering and sales, and the entire graph, again based on centrality and communication, hones in on what's happening and how the company is actually connected. And so I can see here that this one particular resource, this Teresa Lamb, is the key central point between engineering and sales. So it also shows me a couple of things. Number one, she's a single point. So she's a single point of success and also the single point of failure. The other thing is that anytime it comes to trying to figure out who the key person is that is translating the needs of sales to engineering, you can see, from sales, it's going from, mostly going from, let's say, we got, it's going to Myrtle Dodson over to Teresa Lamb, and Myrtle is a little bit more of the central relationships in between sales, and then again works with Teresa to get to a few of these gatekeepers on engineering side, and then ultimately it reaches the central most person in engineering, which is Caitlin Stewart. So really powerful stuff as it relates to trying to understand what's going on within the company and who's communicating with who, right? So the further thing is, now I can take this, now this department is drawn by centrality, but I can do all sorts of different things like location by centrality, and I can do gender by centrality, male, female, gender fluid. I can do age group, and this is what this is trying to measure is a lot of manufacturing, a lot of heavy industry, a lot of private equity owned types of businesses. They have a challenge with transferring knowledge between Gen Z and Gen X and Boomers. And so what I can do is I can actually see how are the Boomers connected to the Millennials, right? And so I can immediately start seeing my data flow between who's communicating with who and where are the opportunities to accelerate that type of analysis. So I can do by group, I can do by ethnicity, white, African, Asian, Hispanic, Pacific Islander. I can do it by, let me go back to department, and then I can actually further do it by sentiment and toxicity. And this really drives into, if I just want to look at sales, and I just want to look at by toxicity, I can redraw the graph by all the toxic messages just within sales, and I can figure out who the key people are. And you can, again, and we can, once we get into deploying this kind of solution, you'll get very good at reading a visual graph around, seeing a well-structured team, highly structured, equal types of communication back and forth, inclusive in nature. And so, but you'll start to pick up places where you can identify where the toxicity lies and then kind of hone in on each one of those things. And so I can say, okay, well, that's where this particular toxicity lies. Let me look into that further around a resource that I can see is the problem. So let me go back to centrality here. and then let me include engineering, and we had seen that the central person within an organization was in sales was this David Borneas, right? So what this does is kind of goes into a user level view and maps out his message trends over time since he's been an employee. Maps out his total number of incidents over time. Maps out these really insightful kinds of fear, joy, and anger indices that show you what's happening over time, and trying to correlate that if there's a problem to kind of hone in on what's going on. And then what it does is generate something called an incident table. And an incident table, again, this is a widget. If you choose not to see this, the system doesn't even report it back to you. If you choose to see this, this is something that's trainable, and that's something that's deployable. Now I can immediately dive into one particular incident that happened on April 12, 2018, and then say, hey, here's a highly aggressive message that he sent to seemingly a manager, it looks like, where somebody must have told him, hey, although I'm a more senior manager, it looks like, it's not a lot of money. I also lost a lot of money, and it's demeaning to the person who maybe not be as senior, right? So that's the kind of stuff that this might have been said to an executive that had Ks, but that's certainly how this would be mapped out. There was a sexual toxic message. There was an attack, kind of a verbal threat attack there, and there was another one earlier in April 11th. And it also shows you the frequent communicators. Again, sample data, but what we're doing here is mapping the closest associates with who he's speaking to with most. So this gives you a little bit more of a closer view. And then you can, again, click on any one of these, and you can dive into any one of those additional kinds of insights. So I wanted to share this particular feature set that is explained and discussed, but not visually shown. So I want to make sure I did show that to you. I apologize for a little bit longer video than I intended. I wanted to shooting for about 6 or 7 minutes. Looks like I got into almost 10 minutes here. So wanted to make sure that was given to you, Diane. And please let me know if you have any questions, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks, bye.